Hi, I'm Nick, and this is Life Through the Camera. One thing I find interesting about filmmaking as I was saying, if you're looking to expand your knowledge of film and have a greater understanding of technique and style, a good exercise to complete is to follow a director through their entire career and watch how the way they express themselves changes over time. Not only is it a good excuse to watch movies, but seeing how people change over the course of their career can teach us about the importance of having a distinctive style. I think a really good example to look at for this is Paul Thomas Anderson, because his style hasn't really changed, it's just become more refined.
Bien sûr, les films se font en équipe, mais que ou quelqu'un a quelque chose à dire, ou quelqu'un a des idées sur la vie, et sur le cinéma et sur le monde, qui disait il n'y a pas de pièce de théâtre, il n'y a que des auteurs.
So, what is PTA's style, and how has it morphed over the course of his career? Let's take a drive. First up, Anderson is a huge fan of camera moves that draw attention to themselves. While some filmmakers like David Fincher want the camera to be invisible, Anderson wants the exact opposite. Think those fast dolly moves that he borrowed from Scorsese. You can also see a similar idea in his handheld shots. Anderson uses these shots to emphasize the most dramatic moment in a given scene. Even something simple as two people sitting down and having dinner can have a dramatic moment.
You wanna kiss me, Jim?
Yes, I do.
While his camera moves have actually slowed down over the course of his career, they're still no less kinetic. So something like this,
Endorsed by the PTA and the North American Teachers Foundation. And we do try to keep our standards high, and that's why we are the longest running quiz show in television history.
becomes this. It's the same basic idea, just slower. Another aspect of his style that has become more refined is his use of long takes. Here's a famous example from Boogie Nights. This shot has 7 characters in 5 different configurations over the course of 3 minutes, but notice how we're never focusing on more than one person at a time. Even in this shot with 3 people, our eye is drawn by the spotlight to focus on one person in particular. 10 years later, Anderson uses another long take but with different execution. Notice how the camera has no specific point of focus in this shot and instead lets the viewer's eye follow whatever interests them. I think one of the reasons Anderson uses them so frequently is actually because it allows his actors to use the full space of the scene and get a more authentic performance. For example, in this scene, some directors might choose to film this in standard coverage.
I will beat your ass like a Cherokee drum.
Maybe one day we'll find out.
Oh, you better hope that day never comes.
But Anderson chooses to let the whole scene play out in just 2 setups, where we can see both characters at all times. This allows for improvised things like this to have the full impact that they deserve. Speaking of having space to work, a crucial part of Anderson's films is that he always shoots with really wide formats. In the first half of his career, Anderson favoured anamorphic lenses which provide massive wide shots even when you do a close-up. This makes sense because Hard 8 through Punch Drunk Love focus on huge casts of characters that are directly linked to their environment.
Because even in Punch Drunk Love, those flare moments evoke, the cosmos in a strange way. He was the first person to say we got to do anamorphic because he was looking at our casting and he's like, these faces are unbelievable. And normally the human face is 4:3, you'd think, but he's like, no, it has to be anamorphic, 4 perf anamorphic, so that you can feel like these faces are in 3D. I have a weird question. Is Punch Drunk Love the first time people saw him anamorphic?
I think it is.
Even if you don't know anything about these characters, you can tell just how different their lives are based on their environment. More recently, Anderson has opted for massive film formats like 65mm. This still frames characters in their environments, but it adds a portrait-like quality to each image. It's almost like you're looking at a painting.
How's work? Business is very food, thank you.
What's very food?
What's that?
You just said very food.
Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to say very good.
Lastly, Anderson is famous for his use of music, but I think what makes it so distinctive is that the music is at odds with the emotional context of the scene. Even though they may not fit perfectly together, they work in a strange way that ends up being harmonious.
No matter what I might vaguely hear in my head, I'm not very musical at all, but no matter what I kind of can feel in my bones, what he comes up with is never fits it, and that's a good thing.
The reason this works so well is actually really simple. All he does is he removes the emotion from what's on screen and then expresses it in the soundtrack. So even in a fast-paced film like Magnolia, we get a scene like this.
It's not going to stop.
Everything slows down and we're left to contemplate. Even when licensed music fell out of favor with Anderson, the same idea is still there. There's nothing really sinister about this shot, but once we hear the music, we know exactly what the emotion of the scene is. Here's the shot, and here's the emotion.
He's a bodyguard for this builder named Wolfman.
So, with all this in mind, let's take two scenes from early and later in his career to see the refinement in his style. This shot from Magnolia and this shot from The Master are both about 2.5 minutes in length. Magnolia is shot with anamorphic lenses, which stretch out the frame and allow us to see the entire room. The Master is shot on 65mm, which means the camera is capturing a wide field of view without the lens distortion of anamorphic. In both formats, you can still clearly see the environment, but the camera brings a different quality to each image. Magnolia is propelled by forward movement, so the camera is constantly on the move except for in the elevator where it has no choice. In The Master, the camera observes from a distance rather than following the characters. In Magnolia, the studio is fast-paced and chaotic, but the soundtrack?
Okay. Busted my ankle there.
In The Master, there is no soundtrack. This scene is funny, but Anderson knows that if he added music to it, it would ruin the natural comedy of the scene. So, wide formats, expressive camera moves, unusual use of soundtrack, and long takes. Everything is the same, just more refined. And I think this is a good reminder that you don't need to reinvent yourself every time you make a film. You can just go back to the same pool of ideas and use them slightly differently. Abrupt stylistic shifts are actually fairly common among filmmakers, but I don't think I've ever seen a director change so much over the course of their career without actually changing almost anything. If early PTA is Scorsese influenced, then his later career is like Kubrick. One is totally different from the other, yet one is informed by the other. And I think that's the key here. So what's the big takeaway? Well, let's hear it from the man himself.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, you know what's inside me is someone who's grown up on movies and television. Do you know what I mean? So that's there on display is a sort of, I think, a sort of channel-changing mentality.
If you looked at this movie at this moment, the one that is in the theaters today,
yeah,
it's the movie you wanted to make.
Exactly.
Is it the movie you set out to make?
Exactly. Yeah.